Most of us picture it the same way. The one who finally walks away. We picture them broken, crying in the car before they even start the engine. And the one who stays behind, calm, already scrolling through someone new to fill the space. We picture them fine, untouched. What if we've had that backwards this whole time? Hey, welcome back to Slow Down with Brenda. Maybe you're the one who left. Maybe you're still there, wondering if leaving is even possible. Either way, I'm glad you're here, because today we're not talking about the moment someone walks out the door. We're talking about what happens after, on the other side of it, in the place nobody thinks to look. Maybe you know this feeling already. You apologized first, even when you weren't the one who was wrong, not because you believed you were at fault, because silence felt more dangerous than being unfair to yourself. Maybe you learned to read a room the second you walked into it. A shift in tone, a longer pause than usual, and some part of you was already adjusting before you even decided to. If that sounds familiar, you already know more about this than you probably give yourself credit for. I used to think that was just who I was, sensitive, maybe a little too much. It wasn't until much later I started asking a different question. Not what's wrong with me for being this way, but what was actually happening every time I did it. I remember one particular evening, years ago now. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the strange part. Nothing happened at all. And somehow that was exactly why I spent the whole night quietly on edge, trying to figure out what I might have done wrong. Looking back, nothing was wrong. I had just spent so long anticipating a storm that never came, my body didn't know how to rest even when the sky was clear. Maybe you know that feeling too. The exhaustion that has nothing to do with what actually happened and everything to do with what you were bracing for. Because here's the part we rarely stop to consider. When we're the one absorbing the tension, softening someone else's spiral so the day can keep moving, we're not just being kind. The person who held everyone together was usually the one falling apart quietly. And when we finally stop doing it, that absence doesn't disappear into thin air. It goes somewhere. That's what we're exploring today. Not to prove anything to anyone who hurt us, just to finally understand what we were really carrying, so we can set it down for good. Let's start where it always starts, with the part of the story nobody names. Every relationship like this has a role in it that nobody talks about, because it doesn't look like a role at all. It looks like just being patient, understanding, a good partner. Maybe you know this one too. Someone got tense, and before it turned into something bigger, you were already there. Softer voice, right question, the thing to say that brought the room back down. Someone spiraled into doubt or anger, and somehow, without ever being asked, you became the reason it passed without turning into something worse. We don't usually call that work. It feels more like instinct, like care. But it is work. Quiet, constant, invisible work. Reading a room accurately enough, quickly enough, to stop a crisis before it became one. That's not weakness. It's a kind of skill most people never learn. It just happened to be aimed at someone who needed far more of it than we ever should have had to give. Here's the part worth sitting with. There's a real difference between someone who benefits from what we give and someone who depends on it. A person who benefits can still function without it, maybe not as smoothly, but they can stand on their own. A person who depends on it can't. Not really. Not without something in them starting to come apart. Every time we soothed, they settled. Every time we absorbed the tension in the room, they got to exhale. Every time we reflected something warm back at them, some shaky part of their sense of self got to feel solid again, just for a while. Peace isn't when everyone is happy. Peace is when you're no longer carrying someone else's storm. Maybe that sounds harsh to say out loud. It isn't meant to. It's meant to explain something that probably confused us for a long time. Why someone who seemed so composed on the outside needed so much from us underneath it. Composure that has to be constantly held up by someone else isn't real composure. It's a structure standing on a foundation it never built for itself. Think about how strange that actually is once you slow down enough to see it clearly. From the outside, it looked like they were the strong one and we were the sensitive one. the one who needed too much, the one who felt too deeply. But underneath, the roles were reversed. They needed us to feel okay. We had simply learned how to need very little in return because asking for anything back had a way of turning into another storm to manage. That's not partnership. That's one person quietly holding up two people's weight and calling it love because nobody ever gave it a more accurate name. So when we finally stopped giving that, when we walked away for real, not just threatened it, not just pulled back for a few days, we weren't just ending a relationship. We were removing the one thing that had quietly been holding someone else together. Which brings us to the question worth sitting with. What actually happens to a person the moment that support disappears? Here's what most people get wrong about the moment someone leaves. They picture the person left behind sitting in an empty apartment, lonely for a while, then eventually moving on, finding someone new, going back to feeling fine. What actually happens is quieter than that, and much harder to see from the outside. When we were there, doing all that invisible work, the other person's inner world always had somewhere to go. Their anxiety could turn into control. Their insecurity could dissolve the moment we reassured them. Whatever fear they carried about not being enough could get pushed outward or buried under whatever performance they were putting on that day. Our presence, without either of us realizing it, made all of that avoidance possible. Once we're gone, that outlet is gone too. And what's left isn't peace, it's exposure. Maybe you've had a version of this yourself. A quiet evening where the noise finally stops, and instead of feeling relieved, you feel unsettled because there's nothing left to distract you from whatever you've been avoiding. That's roughly what silence becomes for someone who has spent their whole life outsourcing their inner world to someone else. Except for them, it isn't one quiet evening. It's the first time in years there's been no buffer at all. Silence was never empty. It was just waiting for someone to finally stop filling it. Maybe you remember hearing it phrased as something about you. Too sensitive, too needy, never quite right. Not because it was true, because it needed somewhere to land, and you were standing close enough to catch it. It wasn't really about us. It was about a discomfort that had nowhere else to go. Think of it like handing someone a bag that keeps getting heavier, one they never learned to carry themselves. As long as someone keeps reaching out to take it, the weight never has to be felt. The moment that hand disappears, the bag doesn't disappear with it. It just falls back into the arms of the person who was never supposed to be holding it all along. Maybe you've seen it yourself. A few weeks later, they looked happier than ever online. New photos, new friends, a new relationship that seemed to begin before the last one had even ended. From the outside, it looked like healing, but speed and healing have never meant the same thing. Maybe you scrolled past one of those photos late at night, the kind where they're laughing in a way that looks completely effortless, and something in you quietly wondered if you'd imagined how hard it all was. If maybe you were the problem after all, since they clearly seem so fine now. Here's what that photo can't show you. It can't show you the version of them lying awake at 2 a.m, reaching for their phone for no real reason, scrolling nothing in particular, just needing something, anything, to fill the 15 minutes before sleep finally takes the choice away from them. It can't show you the new person across the table, the one who says all the right things and still, somehow, doesn't quite land the way it used to. A conversation that should feel like connection, but leaves something faintly unsatisfied underneath it, and no clear reason why. Speed was never proof they were fine. It was proof they couldn't afford to stop. Because someone who is actually at peace with themselves doesn't need to move that fast. They can afford to sit still with what they're feeling. The ones who can't sit still are usually the ones for whom stillness has become the one thing they can't survive. And somewhere underneath all that motion, a quieter question is starting to form. One they don't have the words for yet, and wouldn't say out loud even if they did. Why does this still feel thinner than what I had before? Underneath everything we've talked about so far is one question that eventually finds its way to the surface, whether someone is ready for it or not. Who am I, without someone to reflect me back to myself? For most of us, That question isn't really frightening. We might not have every answer figured out, but we have some sense of what we value, what we feel, what we want that doesn't depend on anyone else's reaction to us. For someone who built their whole sense of identity on being seen a certain way by whoever was closest to them, that question can feel like standing at the edge of something they've spent their entire life avoiding. That's not a flaw in their character so much as a wound with a history. Somewhere early on, in ways that probably had nothing to do with us, this person learned that being loved meant performing, that safety came from managing how others saw them, not from being known as they actually were. So they built an identity that lives on the outside, in an audience, in a mirror. And when that mirror is gone, what's left isn't peace or even grief. It's more like static, where a steady sense of self was supposed to be. Maybe that explains something you noticed but never had words for, how the version of them you saw could shift depending on who was in the room. Confident in front of friends, distant with you, charming with strangers, cold the second the door closed. It wasn't inconsistency, it was someone constantly checking which reflection was being asked of them, because they never quite trusted there was a version underneath all of it worth showing plainly. If you're the one who walked away, I want to say this gently, because I think it matters. Maybe you've replayed that moment more than once, wondering if you left too soon, if you were too sensitive, if you should have tried a little longer. If that's you, here's something worth sitting with. What you did wasn't cold, it wasn't cruel. It wasn't giving up too easily on someone who just needed more patience. What you did was remove yourself from a role you were never meant to carry in the first place, a role that was quietly costing you more than anyone around you probably realized. You don't need to know what happens to the other person next. That was never yours to manage, and it still isn't. And maybe this is worth naming clearly because it's easy to forget in the middle of missing someone. Understanding why someone struggles doesn't mean you were ever required to stay and absorb it. Compassion for where a person came from and responsibility for holding them together are two completely different things. We can hold the first without ever owing them the second. What's yours now is simpler than that. Maybe it's just this. The next time your mind quietly reaches for a room, a mood, a person that isn't yours to steady, notice it. Not to judge yourself for it. That instinct came from somewhere real, somewhere caring. Just notice it and let yourself ask one small question. Is this actually mine to hold right now? Some days the answer will still be yes for people who actually deserve that kind of care from you. A friend having a hard week, a child who needs steadying, someone who reaches for you and also reaches back. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the version of it that only ever flowed one direction, quietly, for far too long. That's the whole step, nothing bigger than that. Healing rarely begins the day they understand what they lost. It begins the day you stop needing them to.